Yet another film that knocks out the intro for me. This is 2020's The Old Guard. Spoiler alert, I might give you my opinion on the film, but that's no substitute for watching it for yourself. If you'd like to give it a try, links to the film are in the description. We open up on Andy walking down a corridor in Morocco, and a motorcycle seems to be meeting up with her. When he catches up, we find out that his name is Booker, and they are there to talk business on a hostage situation. She asks if other members of the team are there, and he assures her that Joe and Nikki are already at the hotel. Once they get upstairs, we meet the other two teammates, and it's definitely a warm welcome. The guys explain that they know she needed a break, but this time they want to do some good. Even though Andy isn't so sure they are really doing any good in the world, she agrees to hear the client out for them. Booker and Andy end up going to meet with a Mr. Copley, and we find out that he is former CIA. Mr. Copley mentions a school in Sudan where the terrorists killed all the teachers and kidnapped 17 of the children. While he talks about the mission, the rest of the team hear everything through a microphone nearby. Mr. Copley tells them that they can name their price, and Andy simply tells him that they'll invoice them once they're done. That's power, to just pick and choose what jobs you do, and you can just name your price for your work because you're the best. You've reached the top of whatever you're climbing when you can do that. Here's to reaching the top. Our team gets dropped off by chopper in the South Sudan desert, and they trek across the land through the day until they come to a guarded compound that night. After they take out the patrolling guards with one sniper round, they infiltrate the compound and clear it as they search for the children. After they push downstairs in the main building, guards appear and open fire on all four of them. When the guards think their job is done, they celebrate quietly amongst each other. That's cool. Handy in a pinch too. After an epic showdown, our four-person crew dispatches all of the guards, and they find out that there were never any children to rescue in the first place. They were set up by the Mr. Copley, and we see that he is watching them on a screen. Beside that screen is a picture of Andy from Civil War time. After talking amongst themselves, they decide that they need to find Mr. Copley, but after that, Andy is done. Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, American soldiers drive through with tanks and ask the villagers for some information on their mission. Here we meet Nile, and she leads a group of soldiers into the homes to ask about the man they're hunting down. After they find out that he's hiding in a room next to them, they breach the room and shoot him down. While Nile tries to save the dying man, he ends up slashing her throat just as he dies. After she dies, the group of our invincible soldiers feel the presence of another one of them joining the ranks. Each of them gets a glimpse of Nile like a dream, and they piece together that another invincible soldier has appeared. Andy doesn't seem too happy about it, but they are a little preoccupied at the moment. It's so cool to think of these protectors being born from death like a phoenix over centuries. Andy even mumbles that she doesn't know why another has appeared now, since it's been 200 years since the last one. That means the others are well over that old by now. After talking, Andy tells the others to find Mr. Copley, and she decides to go help Nile. In England, Mr. Copley is attending an investment conference, and afterwards, he shows footage of the Undying Squad to Merrick, who owns the big pharma company that is asking for funding of their life-extending research. While the video proves he's not lying, Merrick tells him that he needs all of the bodies for it to be viable proof. Even Mr. Copley tries to be optimistic by saying he might be able to get one, but Merrick is balls to the wall with his demand: all or nothing. Back on the base, Nile finds out that she's being sent to Germany for more testing, and everyone glares at her as they can't believe that she's alive without a scratch. Little does she know that Andy is nearby. Andy takes down two soldiers that are trying to get Nile to come with them, and she holds Nile at gunpoint.
Who are you? Andromeda Sathian.
I'm sorry, if you're just gonna knock her out, why even bother throwing that mouthful of a name and title out? She probably got brain damage from hearing that right before she got knocked out. Andy hijacks a vehicle and takes Nile away from the base. When Nile comes to, she kicks the back open and rolls out onto the desert ground. Andy couldn't look any more exasperated by having to stop, and she shoots her in the back of the head. I guess the best way to get someone to believe the story she's about to tell her is to just kill her first. After Andy convinces Nile to get back in the vehicle, they make it to a little makeshift airbase, and they board a drug-running plane. Andy touches base with Joe and she finds out that they had no luck finding Mr. Copley. Then, Nile starts asking more questions about why this is happening and what Andy knows about it. Nile tries to rationalize everything that's happening, but Andy gives her the cold, hard truth that this is just who she is now, and there's no real explanation for it. Nile tries to take over the plane while Andy is sleeping, but Andy has obviously been around the block a little longer than Nile. Andy convinces Nile to let her loose, and the two of them end up fighting up and down the cargo plane. Nile gets a few good shots in, but it's Andy with her years of experience that end up taking the cake. Watching Andy break Nile's arm and leg would have been enough for me to back off and stand down. What's even cooler is watching Nile heal within a matter of seconds. It's great. This makes me think of Wolverine if he was in the army in modern times. Once they get to France, they meet up with the rest of the crew in an abandoned church, and Nile eats with the rest of the crew in silence. She does find out that Booker died with Napoleon, Joe and Nikki killed each other in the Crusades, and Andy is just really old. It turns out that they can die, and one of them did once upon a time. No one knows why, but they do know that after a while, your wounds just stop healing. That night, Nile scares the rest of the crew awake as she wakes up from a terrible dream. As she tells the group about her nightmare about a woman trapped in an iron coffin that was sunk at sea, everyone starts to look around to each other. Booker finally speaks up and tells her that it is Kyun she's dreaming about, and Kyun is the first immortal that Andy found. Kyun and Andy were eventually accused of witchcraft in England, but when they are killed over and over, the people of England take this as a sign that they are indeed witches. That has to be a terrifying sight for someone that can't die. Imagine being locked up in that and being dropped in the sea for all eternity. Drowning is the way that I absolutely don't want to go, and the idea of drowning over and over for eternity is the definition of hell. Nile has to go outside to get some fresh air, and Andy follows her. Nile tries to explain that she doesn't want any of this for her life, but Andy assures her that this is just how things are now. Little do they know that a task team is approaching on the other side of the church, and they breach before Andy and Nile finish talking. When they go inside, Andy finds Booker dead in the chair, and she stays with him to make sure he comes back. It takes longer than usual, but he still comes back. Nile comes back after looking for Joe and Nikki, but she can't find them anywhere. Andy is sure that they'll come back for the rest of them, so she tells the two of them to stay put, and she takes the sword outside. In a secure location, Copley tells the team to go back in for the rest of them, and he assures them that Andy is there now. Well, he's not wrong. If he's smart, he's in a security room in England and not in some shady van out in the road. I'd hope we would be smarter than that by now. Sure enough, the team goes back into the church and Andy is waiting for them. She takes down a whole team with a few rounds and a sword.
I strongly recommend that we leave right now.
So we aren't smarter than that. Still, why would he ever have to be on location? Does he have superpowers? Does he have combat training? Does he even have a gun? That's a wedding ring on his finger there. Get out of there! Soon after, Andy, Booker, and Nile get into a car and chase after the armored truck that carries Joe and Nikki to Copley. They board a plane, and we cut to Andy and the others the next morning. They pull up to a property in France that borders the beach, and they enter an old facility that is a mine that Andy keeps her old things at. Nile looks around at all of the old relics in the mine, and Andy sends Booker to find Copley. Copley, on the other hand, brings Joe and Nikki to meet Merrick, and Merrick experiences the miracle of their healing firsthand. He then takes samples of their blood and sends them to their cells. Meanwhile, Andy notices that she isn't healing like she should, and she leaves Booker to his work and explaining things to Nile. Nile finds out that Booker's son died of cancer, but he died in anger as he thought that Booker could give him some of his gift. Booker, of course, couldn't do that, but his son didn't believe him. Booker warns her away from reaching out to family or loved ones. This is just life now. Meanwhile, Andy has pretty much found out that she's run out of healing or however it works. She gets a store clerk to help dress her wound, and she's amazingly calm about the fact that she's probably gonna die within the near future. No one knows her age, but it's at least older than the Crusades, yet she seems oddly at terms with the fact that her time has come. Back at the big pharma labs, Copley tries to convince Merrick that he doesn't actually need Joe and Nikki now that he has the samples, but Merrick has his own vision for how this is gonna work out. He can't just have his big crew walking around the streets for anyone else to get. He continues to poke and prod them to his heart's content. The next morning, Nile talks to Andy about her family and how her father died in the line of service. Andy mentions how she regrets giving up her search for Kyun. She hates how she let her down when she had promised to keep her safe, and she assures Nile that she's gonna keep that promise to Joe and Nikki no matter what. It's now that Booker comes out and tells him of an address he found that he's linked to Copley. When they get to their destination, Nile can't bring herself to take a gun and kill anyone. She explains to Andy that she doesn't know how to live with killing like Andy does, and Andy gives her a pistol and the keys to the car. I'm sorry, you don't want to help the only other people in the world that know what you're going through because you don't know how to live with death on your hands. You're gonna live for a possible eternity. I think you'll have plenty of time to learn how to cope with it. Andy ends up coming face to face with Copley, and she's amazed that he knows her real name. Suddenly, a shot comes from Booker and Andy is wounded. Booker ties her up and it's clear that he set them up. Copley explains that his wife dying caused him to study their history, and Booker tells her that he just wanted to find a way for their immortality to end. Well, he could have waited another day or two and Andy could have showed him. When Merrick and his crew show up, they see that Andy is no longer immortal, but they decide to take her anyway. Copley tries to get in the way of them, but he's knocked out without any effort at all. After everyone is gone, Nile comes in and finds Copley tending to his wound. She asks where Andy and Booker are, and Copley asks who she is. When she shoots herself in the foot, it becomes a little more apparent to him.
You're another one.
Yeah, I'm new.
Not the best choice in one-liner, but it seems to suit her quite nicely. I honestly couldn't see Nile saying much else, honestly. At least she gets right to the point when it comes time to proving a point, and she wasn't dumb enough to shoot a major section. What if her toe never grew back though? Copley quickly gives Merrick up, and he tells Nile about Andy's history and the fact that she's dying now. Copley ends up taking Nile to Merrick's building, and he gives her his access card so she can handle business on her own. Nile gets an arsenal together and takes the elevator up to the lab on the 15th floor. Once there, the enemy quickly finds out that Nile is there, and she even has Merrick at gunpoint at one point. Nile just happens to stumble into the lab that the others are being kept in, and she frees everyone while they arm themselves. After a nice little pep talk, they head out to kill Merrick. This is the part of the movie that was absolutely amazing. I can't show you all of it, obviously, but the way that they sweep the floor was so mesmerizing that I forgot to write the entire time they were going. Such fluid motion and excellent teamwork that some real squads only wish they could have. Eventually, Merrick's bodyguard arrives and puts a hurting on Joe and Nikki while the others continue their assault. Amidst the chaos, Andy breaks off and downs one of the guards that they ask where to find Merrick. They end up finding out that he's in the penthouse, and they continue their assault. Merrick, on the other hand, is in his penthouse with Andy's war axe waiting for them. Actually, that can't be called a war axe. What kind of weapon is that? Comment down below if you know. Again, the combat is so smooth here as they push their final attack, but I gotta show you one tiny part of it. Obviously, that might have to be a little censored, but you get the idea. The combat in this movie is so smooth that it really does seem like they've had centuries to perfect the art. Once they clear the floor, they find out that Merrick has run somewhere. While the others go search for him, Andy and Nile take a moment to talk about her mortality, and Andy believes she lost her immortality when Nile showed up. In the middle of this heartfelt conversation, Merrick shows up with a gun on Andy. In an epic switcheroo, Nile ends up tackling Merrick out of the window and crashes onto a car on the ground floor. Needless to say, Nile survived, Merrick didn't. The crew ends up going to a local pub and they enjoy each other's company now that everything has died down. The group sits to decide what they want to do about Booker's betrayal, and Nile goes out to talk to him. He assures her that she'll be a great addition to the team, and Andy comes out to talk to him next. Andy tells him that the others will meet him in that same spot in 100 years, but Andy knows she won't be there to see him. She says her final goodbye to him and they go their separate ways. The rest of them go back to Copley's house and they look at all the evidence of the good they've done for the world, and they see what their purpose is on Earth. 6 months later, Booker is back in France and he spots none other than Kyun. Then the credits roll. I'm sorry, I've only said this a few times, but where's my sequel? I was actually waiting on them to go try and find her before the final showdown, but you can't just end like that, especially knowing that this is a Netflix original and they rarely make sequels. All in all though, I highly recommend this to everyone. Go watch it right now. Thank you for watching and I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more like this one. Comment what you think I should watch next and I'll see you in the next video.